I think it's incredible, and the pace. There was a conversation that happened here in Portland end of last year with Brad Smith from Microsoft, and he was just talking about the tens of billions of dollars that they had spent over the last essentially, you know, 30 days globally, just acquiring data center infrastructure. And that was to, again, meet the demand that they saw coming down the pike. And I think that there is, of course, always the caveat that, there could be some sort of a retrenchment in terms of that demand. Yes, there could be a little bit of a softening of an AI bubble at some point. But, the AI train has left the building, and it is moving forward in a big way. And I think the only question is how much adoption and when. And there could be some swings, minor, back and forth, but the momentum and everything is moving in a particular direction that I don't see stopping anytime soon.
When we're talking traditional data centers, these are facilities that are hosting websites, web applications, multimedia solutions, but the intensity of the compute workload is very different. And also just the amount of energy that needs to be provided to run those sorts of workloads is just at a completely different scale than a hyperscaler. So you might have like a standard data center that's hosting a websites or web apps, or your traditional activities. You're looking at a rack that can range maybe around 5 to 15 kilowatts with somewhat simple air cooling systems that are pretty good and sufficient for these lower density setups. So overall, just that creates a less overhead on the energy demand for that facility's mission. But hyperscalers, it's just a whole different ballpark. And I didn't bring this up to the earlier conversation, the difference between like a large resort and data center. Another is the thermal. I mean, all that electricity that goes in turns into a heat. And then you gotta really have some sophisticated and advanced cooling systems. And then when it comes to that server rack energy consumption and electric load, it can exceed 50 kilowatts. So you're going from 5 to 50, and it's just going to grow. That's the thing. It's not like being constrained or becoming less of an energy load. It's just going to continuously grow.
You've got different approaches that companies are taking, but I think that on the whole, at the end of the day, a lot of the companies that are building this infrastructure want to see standardization and certainty from a planning standpoint. And right now you have anything but that. A lot of states are rushing into the lack of federal efforts here from a regulation standpoint to essentially figure out in their own regulatory environments what are some of the ways they can apportion costs and share costs in a way that they think is equitable. But yeah, there are multiple bills in different states, some of them targeting a specific rate class for data centers and other high energy users. Others are trying to figure out ways to apportion increases in demand for energy more equitably across a lot of different organizations and entities that are putting more demands on the grid. And again, the complexity that Robert alluded to earlier is not making any of these efforts easier. And in many cases, this is another example of policy kind of a bit behind the innovation and the market, and it's trying to play catch up.
And we were curious, what set of technologies, what sequence, what investment strategy would make the most sense, and how strong is the business case for relying just on the grid. And what we found is, from just a tempo of project implementation, initially you have to just go with whatever the grid provides and then backfill with DERs. And then you build out the DERs as the data center's load grows. And it could be traditional technologies like battery and solar, while maintaining the backup generators and then the opportunity for combined heat and power. And when we looked at it, we saw like this phased approach where you have this utility connection. So, and then bringing in the distributed energy resources and the various technologies in a sequence over the life of the project, with the flexibility to plug in new technologies like small modular reactors, was the most robust, reliable, both from an economic justification perspective and also from a decarbonization perspective. And the flexibility to reorient those resources and assets at any time. And by that, I mean, there's a fear of stranded assets where the utilization of the asset just isn't going to be there, and the payback and the economics and that return on investment just isn't going to look too good. But with this phased approach, it really addressed and mitigated any of those challenges. And what stood out to me personally was that in none of the scenarios, the grid made sense, especially if you bring in combined heat and power. So if you're addressing the thermal and the electricity, it's just too strong of a business case. West Coast and East Coast. I mean, East Coast, it's like cheap electricity. But even at those very aggressive price points that the East Coast has versus what the West Coast has, the grid never pencils out.